Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Last Epoch is a new isometric action RPG that I've been playing like crazy ever since it came out. The technical issues with the servers have made that experience worse than it should be. 11th Hour Games, the studio behind Last Epoch, just wasn't ready for such massive player base, and they've been struggling with keeping the servers alive. Even when you can log in with no issues, switching zones in the game can take forever. That was actually my biggest problem with the servers. I could log in, but I had to restart the game countless times when I go to a new zone. It seems like the technical issues are getting solved as we speak, and it will probably get a lot better in the near future. That being said, there is also an offline mode that you can play with no issues at all. I usually play these kinds of games in single-player offline mode, but I wanted to test out the online mode for the purposes of this review. And I'm glad I did, despite all the technical issues. That being said, let's talk about the actual game. I heard about this game a long time ago, but I wanted to wait for the release version before I try it out. I'm a massive fan of Diablo-like action RPGs. I played a bunch of old and new games that can be categorized in this subgenre of RPGs. Grim Dawn is my personal favorite, and it's like a measuring stick when I'm trying out new ARPGs, so I'm going to make some comparisons here and there. That should be a normal approach, I guess, and I'm sure that many people compare these games to Path of Exile, Diablo 4 and so on. I played those games as well, by the way. After beating the campaign in Last Epoch and playing the endgame in the past couple of days, I think I have a good grasp of the game's major features and mechanics. Naturally, it will take a lot more hours invested to properly talk about the potential and the depth of the endgame systems, but I think I'll certainly get there eventually. When you start the game, you get to choose a class. There are 4 base classes in total, and each class has 3 different masteries, which will significantly shape your playstyle in a unique way. I play with the Sentinel class because Void Knight mastery sounded really cool to me. It sounds like a Death Knight who focuses on melee weapons and dark spells. You get a simple slideshow cutscene which introduces the lore and the story of the game. The time travel aspect is essentially the main gist of the story, and especially the setting itself. To be honest, I always thought that the time travel in games and movies is the cheapest way to tell a story. However, Last Epoch utilizes this aspect of the game to its fullest potential, especially when it comes to the gameplay and how the game works in general. The story itself is like, whatever.
Enough! I have grown tired of this! Huh. Your skills entertain me.
I really gave it a chance in the beginning, but I zoned out very fast. It quickly turns into a "you're the greatest hero who is supposed to kill all the bad guys and save the world." And you get that classic NPC confused dialogue when you say that you're going to kill that particular monster or the entire army of bad guys. Yeah, it's like whatever.
Reaching Thetima will prove more complicated than we thought. It is too dangerous to take the river. Are you insane?
There are only a handful of characters that could be even considered as memorable. The time travel feature made some parts of the story a bit more interesting, like the fact that you're going to meet some of the characters twice in different eras. The voice acting is okay at best, and there are a bunch of dialogue lines without voice acting.
Now it shall bear my final blessing.
On the other side, I still think you should give the game a chance, even if you only want to beat the campaign and the main storyline. The gameplay is obviously the main reason why you should give this game a chance. You start off with a couple of different spells, and I really like how the beginning of the game is designed. The very first enemy type you're going to fight teaches you a simple mechanic that you have to avoid. Then soon after this you'll fight a boss that has the same attack with a little twist on top of his unique spells and abilities. It's nothing special, but it goes to show you that the developer tried to design a comprehensive learning curve for new players from the very beginning. Speaking of which, the campaign starts off with a really decent amount of challenge, although it shouldn't take long until you get your build going, which kinda flips the script when it comes to the difficulty curve. I can only speak for myself and my build, which focused on huge AoE strikes, but I'm pretty sure that every class will have somewhat similar experience. When you get your build going and some items that will complement your mastery, you're either going to erase enemies from the screen or get one-shotted here and there. That could literally describe my whole campaign experience with the game, and here are some examples. The bosses are a bit different, as you would probably expect. I think they are well designed, with a very decent amount of mechanics that you have to avoid with movement skills and just with character positioning. In later chapters, some of the bosses will really test your skills, but I wouldn't say that any of the campaign bosses are extremely hard. However, the very last boss in the game is much harder compared to the rest, as it should be. And it also subtly shows you what to expect from the endgame content when it comes to boss fights. I was a bit disappointed with the last boss though, but not from the mechanical side of things. It just didn't feel like the endgame boss, it was really underwhelming from that perspective. Speaking about the underwhelming features in the campaign, I thought the visual progression of my character was very weak. The amount of different looking armor pieces is very low, and even the unique items look, well, unique would be the last term I would use. That kinda sucks because I personally hold visual progression in RPGs in high regards. In fact, it's one of the most important features to get right if you ask me. Although this is easily fixable, and maybe they can improve it in the future with new models. I mean, the icons of these unique items are really cool, and they certainly get you excited when you see them drop, which is also really important. But the actual model itself, not so much. Compared to something like Grim Dawn, which has unique looks for even the most basic loot in the game, let alone higher quality items, this aspect of Last Epoch leaves a lot to be desired. Although I'm pretty sure that Endgame has a lot bigger number of unique looking gear pieces. I managed to get around 6 or 7 unique items in the campaign, a couple of green set items and similar high quality loot. Now that I started clearing the endgame echoes, I started seeing a lot more high quality gear drops in general. I just hope to see a lot of improvements on this field in the future patches. Now let's address the elephant in the room, which will be the online store. The online store currently has some cosmetic items that you can buy for real money, like capes, helmets and even the full armor sets. These items don't affect your stats at all, it's all purely cosmetic. You get a special tab which is like a transmog system, but you can only place store items here as far as I'm aware. You could definitely make an argument that the lack of visual progression is related to the online store, even though there are only a handful of items you can buy. Naturally, when you have cosmetic armors and weapons for real money, it's beneficial for the game to make those items as flashy as possible. I would be okay with this if actual armor pieces in the game have similar design, at least when it comes to unique items. We can only wait and see how the store changes in the future, and you be the judge. The character progression itself is very good because each new piece of gear can make a noticeable impact in fights. Not to mention a pretty deep class progression system, which does a great job at teaching you everything you need to know without being overwhelming. Maybe I just got used to playing these ARPGs over the years. But I'm pretty sure we'll have an easier time to understand Last Epoch as a new player compared to Path of Exile, which is borderline insane, or even Grim Dawn to be honest. Both of those games just slap the layers of progression on top of your face and hope you don't suffocate. Last Epoch has more than enough depth within the progression system, but I really like the way it's presented to the player. Mind you, it can still be overwhelming if you never played anything similar, but it does a better job compared to its competition. And the main reason for that is the presentation, like I said. You don't get to unlock this mastery straight away, you need to level up first and get some skills from the base class. Then you get to choose between the masteries at one point and focus on specific skills and passive abilities from the mastery. That's not all though, you will choose 5 specific skills to specialize in, and each of those skills have a full-blown talent tree. If I'm making this sound complicated, I'm doing a poor job because, like I said, it's presented very well to the player. The way I play these new ARPGs is with an Unga Bunga playstyle and build. I just choose whatever seems interesting to me until I hit a brick wall and I'm forced to change something. Which did happen, but only a few times because I had some low resistances to certain elements, but you can easily find items to offset this problem or use the crafting system. Besides that, I didn't have to change a single thing and I'm still in the endgame content without completely optimizing my passive skills. So don't worry too much about that until you get to the endgame maps. So what about the fundamentals of the game? Well, the action itself is pretty good, up to the point where the gameplay easily becomes very addictive, at least in my case. When I stopped playing, I constantly thought about playing again, which can tell you a lot about the gameplay in general. However, the combat has some slight issues, which could be addressed in future updates. Some animations look stiff, like the charge ability on the Sentinel. It could be way snappier, and it lacks a bit of polish when you're trying to charge on enemies which are blocked by the wall. I had some situations where I got completely frozen in motion and I thought this was the server issues, which might still be the case. But in other cases, the character would just go straight through some obstacles or walls or not even react properly on your button inputs. Speaking of which, I played the whole game with my Xbox controller just because I'm a lazy piece of shit. No, but seriously, I usually play these kinds of games with mouse and keyboard, but I just wanted to rock the chair back and relax with the game a bit. The game works very good with the controller, despite the fact that last Epoch is not on consoles. The only notable issue I want to mention is the lack of continuity with some of the button inputs. Sometimes I have to press my basic ability twice in a row before I can hold the button and deal continuous damage. This makes the gameplay in those situations a bit janky, and I'm not sure that's the case with mouse and keyboard, probably not. The action combat lacks a bit of polish, but it's far from being unpolished in general. I never got tired of erasing enemies on the screen with my abilities with one huge AoE attack which deals massive damage. It literally deletes enemies from existence, which is extremely cool. It truly lives up to its name. The camera perspective is static, so you can't move it around, and for 90% of the game you won't have any problems. The camera perspective can sometimes be obstructed by some object on the screen, which can even cause you to die in a boss fight. The transparency of objects in those situations could be a lot better. Then we have the sound effects, which are very beefy and impactful. The combat sound effects on my Void Knight are more than satisfying, the game just lacks a bit more polish, like I mentioned before. The online mode in this game works almost exactly like in Path of Exile. You're going to see other players on the map, but only in major cities, which function like hub areas. I didn't have any interest in playing with other players, but it was very cool to see them in cities. To add to this discussion, even though I was extremely disappointed with Diablo 4, I wish more ARPGs take the same approach when it comes to interacting with other players in the world. Diablo 4 had the right idea for this, even though the open world itself was a complete joke in that game. Last Epoch has a ton of different maps with great visual variety in terms of the landscapes and enemy types. The design of the maps is a bit too linear for my taste, especially coming from Grim Dawn. It feels like we're playing Diablo 3.5 to be honest, which is not a compliment by any means. Don't get me wrong, it's not fundamentally bad, I would just prefer a bigger open world, like in Grim Dawn. Come to think of it, Grim Dawn puts to shame all other modern ARPGs in terms of the open world design. Every map is huge in that game and it just begs to be discovered with a bunch of secrets to find, quests to solve and unique monsters to kill. Not to mention the lack of loading screens between these huge zones, except when you're entering a dungeon. Last Epoch did a decent job for what it's trying to be, and that would be a more linear ARPG with some optional paths to take here and there. Only a handful of maps in the campaign had a more open design, like this one at the very end. Again, this is not exactly a critique, it's just what I personally would prefer to see in a game. We should always judge the game for what it's trying to do and how well it does it. Come to think of it, the more linear design of these maps works a lot better in the endgame content. I'm very close to hitting level 70, so I'm not exactly extremely deep in the endgame. I think level 100 is the max. The endgame also utilizes the same time travel mechanic. You get maps from different areas that you have to clear and unlock even more maps. There are different objectives to solve, which usually involves you killing enemies, surviving waves of enemies, saving civilians and so on. Very simple objectives, but a good enough reason for you to grind the levels, get better gear, and optimize your build as much as possible. After collecting enough stability points, you get to do a certain quest on the map, which usually have a boss fight. These boss fights are considerably more challenging than anything you encountered in the campaign. There is also an arena mode, which I still didn't try out, and you have roguelike dungeons as well. Overall, the endgame seems like an endless system of maps. I will continue playing the endgame and probably make another review when I clock in a lot more hours in the endgame. The last thing I want to mention is the visuals. You should have a very good idea how the game looks by now if you made it to this point in the review. I think the art style in the game is good enough to separate itself from other similar titles. It's not very unique though, and some parts of the game look very generic actually. However, the game has an impressive amount of different looking areas which are inspired by unique time zones. This makes the visual variety very strong, which is a huge plus in my book. And that will conclude my review for Last Epoch.
I have grown tired of this.
So far, I think Last Epoch is definitely worth playing, even if you only want to beat the campaign, which should take around 15 to 20 hours. The endgame looks promising and interesting, and I'll keep grinding the levels to further improve my Void Knight class. If you're on the edge with the game, I would suggest waiting for the servers to stabilize if you want to play in online modes. I didn't expect a lot from this game, and that's probably one of the main reasons why I love it so much, even though I think they could do a lot more to further improve the game. Did you play Last Epoch, and what do you think about the game? Leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to the channel would mean a lot. And if you want to go a bit further than that, becoming a channel member or a Patreon would mean a lot. Many thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.